just recording anyway. All right, the class is being recorded, guys. So what I'm saying is that I'm going to this Microsoft Evaluation Center to download Windows Server 2019, which is valid for 180 days. So I'm sending this link to everybody.
Doctor.
Yes.
It's selecting under the start your evaluation, under the continue, you have the Azure.
No, yeah, we're not doing the Azure. We're doing the ISO file. All right, we're going to select the ISO file. So I'm sending this. Hold on, let me make sure I select the ISO file and refresh it so it picks them. Okay. Guys, you're selecting the ISO file. Don't download the Azure. You've not gone that far. Okay, that's the link. Click on that link and then select ISO file and click continue. Just like we did with the download of SQL Server, we're going to fill this form not with your information. Use any information that you can put in here, and then click next. Or after that, you're just going to select English language and click download. That's all. No, thank you. I wasn't recording. Okay, so what I'm saying is that this Hyper-V Manager is the guided user interface to manage all your virtual machines. And you can see here, I have a couple of virtual machines that I created here. Every single one of these virtual machine functions as a computer on its own, independent, right? It's an independent computer that functions completely different. You can turn it off, turn it on, just like any ordinary computer. For example, if I decide that I want to connect to, let me stop the connection so you guys will already see how it works. Already connected. Just like any ordinary computer that you have, that's how virtual machines start. So once you have it here, just like you switch on your computer and start it, see right now it says stop or it's off. If I right click, I have the option to say start. Right? I can start the virtual machine and I can connect to it. So you do a RDP, remote desktop connection to the virtual machine, because it's no longer local where you can press on and off. It's no longer a physical machine. It's a virtual machine. It exists, but it's only virtually. So I have the option to right click and connect to it. When I say connect, this is what comes out. And it's just like an ordinary computer that you have. It asks me to sign in, put a password and sign in. So if I can sign in, put a password and I say sign in. See, it opens just like any ordinary computer. This is a computer, a virtual machine inside my computer. I can right click on it and I can say start. See, I can restart it, shut it down, start, disconnect, or sign out. I can sign out and I ask another user to sign back in. It functions just like a computer. So these are servers. So what we're planning to do here is simulate what happens in the corporate world. Because when you start working, you're going to work on servers. And servers functions just like this. So you come in, because the server is always going to be on, you are not allowed to shut down the server. The fastest way to get fired in the company is to shut down the server. All right? So you can sign in, and whenever your account gets created, you come in the morning, the first thing you do is you sign in to the server. It opens up, you sign in, and you have your server working. You can do whatever you want to do, and when you are done at the end of the day, you right click and you go on sign out. You sign out of the server. You don't shut down and you don't restart. These two buttons are the most dangerous buttons that you will come across. You must get authorizations from your manager to shut down or restart the server, because everyone that has connection to that server will be notified that we're about to restart the server or about to shut it down only during maintenance. So you can't do that. So, and I want you guys to get used to this, because this is how a server looks like. This platform, if I open my server at work, you see it looks just like this. And to show you how it looks like. So now, when you do this, you have the option, you can right click, you can check the drives that you have there. And so this server has about, let's see how many drives I have here. This PC, okay, has just one drive. All right, okay. So there's a reason why we started this class by going through partitioning and doing all those kinds of things so you get used to it. So we're going to go do it again right now in the corporate world, the way it's been done in the corporate world. So for you to see it. So if I want to connect to another server, for example, I can decide I want to connect to the server called Houston. Let's say connect. After I've started it. So you can now see why I insist that you need to have 16 gigabytes of memory. Why? Because look, the server has 16 and every single one here is running roughly 2 gigabytes of memory. And the server, the computer itself has its own memory that it needs to use. So if you don't have it, you cannot run 3 computers on a server that does not have. So you can't give out what you don't have. If they need more than 16 and you don't have it, you can't. So that's why we can only do this when you really have 16 gig. It doesn't mean that less than 16 will not work, but it will be very slow in class. Everybody will be ahead, you'll be stuck behind. All right, so I can log onto this server. This is another server. I'll log onto it. Password is wrong. Oh, and I remember I changed this password. Kiawi tech.com. Okay. See? So you can see here right now, these are 2 different servers. This is a different server. This is another one that I can log onto this. This is a different server. If I want to sign out, I need to click on this minimize button. Not sign out, just get out of it. Now I'm out. Now I'll connect to a different server. When I'm done, I just minimize and I get out. Except I want to sign out. Let's say I want to sign into this other one now called prod, connect. So now it requires me to put the password. So put the password. Look here, I have 107 days left because this is evaluation edition. The moment it counts down to 0, this window will be expired and Microsoft will require you to reinstall it, reinstall the operating system. But if you see, I do have some licenses for some server that does not expire. For example, this one. This one does not show anything here. This is why, because I bought the license here. It's really, really expensive, the license. I only have 3 licenses and it cost me $10,000. So I'm not able to share that one out. But so you see that this is how it works. It looks like that. So now if I minimize it and I go down here, these are 3 different computers, 3 different servers working independently from each other. I can, if I decide that, okay, I have a problem on the server called Houston, I can right click here and I just restart the server. If the solution is to restart the server, I can click on restart. And because it's a server, it will always warn you. Are you sure you really want to do this? Yes, I'll give you a reason why you want to do this. Is it maintenance? Is it on plan or plan? So maintenance, and I click OK. And you see that it's going to see, it's restarting. This is not, now when it starts restarting, everything goes off. But it's not affecting any other one here. These other ones are just working because they're independent, right? These are virtual machine. So we call them virtual machine, but who provides the resources for this virtual machine? It is your computer. So at this moment here, your computer becomes what is called a physical machine because you can touch your computer, you can touch your server. So in every virtualization technology, there is always going to be a physical box and a virtual box. A virtual box is called the guest. The physical is called the host, right? You host and the guest sits on it. It's just like you own your house and you can give all extra resources that you don't need. So if the host does not have enough memory, enough disks, you cannot give it out to the guest, which is the virtual machine, right? So this is the technology behind all this. Okay. So that's what we're going to be working on. So you see this one is restarting, just like any ordinary server. it's going to restart. And we can go in there and do installations, run whatever program that we're running on it. It has a different layer separated by the hypervisor. All right, so head count. How many people are done with the installation?
Mine is still on 96. I don't know what's going on. It's just there. It's not moving.
Okay.
The download or installation.
The download.
Doctor, I was kicked out. I just restarted.
Nelly, for some reason your voice is very low.
No, I was kicked out, sir. I just restarted my computer, so I don't know what happened.
Okay, what's the download? What's the percentage download?
It says 38 minutes.
Okay. Wow. So there are only 2 people that are done with the download? 3, actually.
Yeah, I'm done with it, sir.
So there's Eddie, Emmanuel, Silva, and Margaret. Anyone else? Okay. For that reason, let's take time and do something else. All right. Okay. Bring up all the problems that you have. What problem do you have in this class?
Are you sure, doctor?
Yes.
We need a job.
I think
We need money.
triggers we did not complete.
What's for?
I think we had triggers where I think we were supposed to do.
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you so much. Triggers.
And temporary tables which were not completed. So I thought we were going to finish.
There are quite a couple of things. If you looked at the mail that, I don't know whether he copied you guys on that. There are a couple of things, if you looked at the syllables that we have not yet done. If you've been following this syllable, it's not been like from page 1 all the way down, right? We've been jumping left, up, and down, depending on the need at that particular moment. So every single thing that you have on that table, on the syllables, will be covered. It might not be done now, but the moment we're done with these projects, and we start the projects, we'll eventually come back to most of those things. So don't worry, before we're done, we would have covered everything. So since everybody is still trying to download, let's take this time right now and do our triggers. Very good. Thank you, Zafo. All right. So we're back to scripts, guys. Scripts. Oh, yay.
We started function, sir. Why? I think we should finish function before you continue to something.
The moment I talk about script, I see their faces just go like this. Oh, man. Triggers are part of functions, Nelly.
Okay.
Yeah, so triggers are part of functions. So there's not so much we're going to do on triggers. So, but you need to understand the concept behind triggers. Okay, so make sure this is recorded. Okay, so triggers. What are triggers? What are they used for? So all of you have already experienced what a trigger is. Unknowingly, you've already experienced what triggers are. Triggers are used for security reasons. For example, so when you go to the bank, for example, when you get a credit card or bank card issued to you, and you go around shopping, sometimes you swipe your card and it declines, the transaction declines. And then a couple of minutes or just a couple of seconds afterward, you get a text message on your phone from your bank requesting an authorization or requesting to find out if you actually carry out that transaction, right? Who has experienced that? I'm sure anybody that has a bank account here must have had that one. Or you are on vacation, strangely in a foreign land, and your bank was not notified that you're going out of the country. You swipe your card, it's declined because no one is expecting that you should be somewhere in South America. And you get an alert after that. So requesting to reply yes or no if you actually recognize that transaction. Those are triggers. And there are two different types of triggers. We have 2 different types of trigger. So the only question that you get on trigger in an interview is to explain what triggers are. And when you are explaining what triggers are, you need to explain the different types of triggers that you know. So triggers, so triggers are just there are alerts that are fired before or after an event has happened, you know, and they are used mostly for security reasons, because the developer or the DBE is trying to prevent certain transactions from happening in the environment. And you have two different types of trigger. You have the instead of trigger, the instead, just like word instead. Instead of doing this, I'm going to do this. So the instead of trigger and the after of trigger. All of here. The instead of trigger.
So I have a question, Doctor.
Yes.
What is the second one, sir?
The instead of trigger, can we say it is a before trigger?
No, that's not default.
No, before, because what I saw was a before trigger and after trigger.
That's what I was about to conclude. That it's the before and the after of trigger. That's what I was trying to make sure I verify that information before I do it. So it's a before trigger and the instead of trigger, right? So what are the differences? So that's the things that we're going to do right now to check what the differences is all about. So the before trigger, right? The before trigger, it means there is a trigger that is fired, right? The before trigger is a trigger that is fired prior to prior to something happening in your environment. So
Sir,
say again.
are triggers stored procedures?
Triggers are not stored procedures, but they fall under the triggers are not stored procedure. But a trigger, or inside a trigger, you could have functions that are being called up inside a trigger. We're going to look at real examples of different types of triggers that you can have in SQL and how that actually works out.
Doctor, because the definition I saw is that triggers are a special types of store procedures.
So I will not call the triggers as store procedures. Honestly, I will not call triggers as store procedures. They are called shares. They are called and they execute a certain task whenever a certain transaction happens. When certain events happen on your environment, they are fired. So you don't execute a trigger with a store like you execute a store procedure. So, but inside a trigger, you can have functions that are actually called inside that trigger, right? So, and they help you to maintain the security. So inside a trigger, you could set what is called a DML trigger, or Dml Operation trigger, which means that every single time you have in your environment, someone tried to insert data into a table, try to delete data into a table, or try to update data on a table, that alert is fired, right? So any DML event that happens, you get a trigger fired as a result of that, right? So that's the kind of way you can do that. So, and then we're going to go ahead and create those different types of triggers, and you're really going to see the way it functions. It alters information on the table, and how that's when information is altered on the table, how the triggers gets fired. So now let me bring your attention back again to what all the different types of triggers are. So you have the before trigger or the for trigger. Sometimes they call it the for trigger, FOR, the for triggers, right? Which means that alert is fired before the event actually happened, right? Well, the after trigger, or you can call it the instead of trigger, which means they're actually fired instead of that event that you wanted. It's fired. For example, you want to swipe your card, right? You want to swipe your card, and instead of that transaction going through, SQL blocks that transaction and fires an alert to you. So that's the instead of.
Excuse me, doctor.
Say it again.
Excuse me.
Yes.
We can hear you.
You guys can hear me?
We can hear you, doctor.
We can hear you.
Can hear you.
Ada, I guess there's something wrong with your network. You might want to check that. Right? Okay. So what I'm saying is that instead of that event happening, like your transaction going through, you want to buy something, instead of that event actually happening, SQL Server instead stop that transaction and fires an alert to you. Right? So, and
I'm finding it hard time to hear. It's cracking. I can hear you.
Ada, I guess can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Perfectly.
Ada, you might want to log onto the class. You might want to dial in, okay? If your internet is giving you issues, you want to dial in.
Hear you.
Oh.
I'm going to mute you.
I can hear you here. It's cracking.
Well, it's your internet, so everybody can hear you. Okay? All right? Okay. So, for example, let me give another example of an instead of trigger. You try to insert data into a table, right? You try to insert data into a table. The moment you click insert or commit, SQL Server, instead of accepting that insert, the value that you've inserted, it stops that insert and fires but an alert to you back to your phone. That is an instead of trigger because it stops the transaction and fires an alert to you, right? Okay. All right. So, and so the after trigger, we want to call it after trigger. An example is when you do a transaction at a bank, that transaction goes through, but then you get an alert after that. The money has been sent successfully. It doesn't stop that transaction. It lets it go through, but an alert is fired immediately that transaction is done. So that is an after of trigger. That after trigger, which means that trigger actually does not block the transaction. It actually lets the transaction go through, but a trigger is only fired after the event has happened, which is most of the time used for notification purposes. Right? This is mostly for notification purposes. So you just want to be aware that something has actually happened. And most of the time, triggers are stored on a very secret table. Because if you have a very secret database or table that you don't want anyone to do any modification on, for example, a table that holds employees' salary table. Well, you don't want any employee to secretly go in there and change a couple of figures in that. So you can set an instead of trigger on that table. So any time that someone changes information there, it either blocks that information and fires an alert, but that alert doesn't get to the person who is doing it. That information is saved secretly on the table where the auditors can come in there and look at it. Okay, on this particular day, X, Y, and Z try to change data on this table, you know? So it will not actually accept it, but an alert is fired and the individual does not see that. So that you can use that also for audit purposes. Right? Okay. So there's really not much you can say about triggers apart from demonstrating how triggers actually work. So I'm going to spend this time now to show you guys how a trigger works and how you can set it up in your environment for security purposes. So when you are talking about security, in an interview, you do have to talk about permissions. You have to talk about encryptions. You have to talk about triggers, right? Encryption, I'm not sure you guys have done encryption. We're still to do encryption. Did we do encryption in this class? I'm not sure, right? We haven't done encryption. Data encryption.
No.
All right, transparent data encryption. All right, so those are part of the things that falls under security. All right, so.
Doctor.
Yes, please.
Are there any disadvantages of using triggers?
Disadvantage of using triggers. I won't actually think of any right now. There might be, but I can't really think of any disadvantage of using trigger. Triggers. No, I can't think of anyone right now. Why? Did you find something that shows the disadvantage of using triggers?
Yeah, I saw something saying that it adds the workload to the system, and it also causes the system to run slowly, because each time these triggers are fired, they remain in the system, they are stored in the system, and they cause the system to run slowly.
Well, if you look at it in that direction, it could be a disadvantage, right? Well, it really depends on what the system is actually doing, what the trigger is all about. I mean, there are so many complicated types of triggers that when you see developers writing that you'll be shocked. Well, it could eventually cause the system to slow down, especially when every single time you're trying to do an insert into a table, the trigger has to be modified. It might cause the system to slow. But that is not a well-known effect that I'm aware of, but it could eventually cause that.
Okay.
All right?
All right.
Any questions so far as triggers are concerned before we go on to look at how to create them?
Excuse me, Doc.
Yes, please.
Sorry, please. I really want to understand the two main types of triggers. You said instead of trigger. Did you cancel that, or was it a mistake? Because you later said we have before trigger and after of trigger.
No. I did not cancel the instead of. I mixed up a little bit on the instead of trigger and the after trigger, right? But you also have the for trigger, right? The for trigger. I think the for trigger falls. Let me check again. The for trigger falls under the. Hold on. Let me check. Hold on.
Also, I have question.
Yes. Okay. Hold on here.
Are you ready?
No, hold on with your question. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay. I'm trying to look at it as a place that I saw the comparison between the four. Hold on here. Let's see.
Doc,
Yes, please.
I was just checking here, and it appears the before trigger is like the for trigger, and it's like the instead of, so it's like different names.
Yeah, so that's what I'm a little bit confused with the naming.
And then the third class that just says the combination, where you have the combination.
So if you look at this here, right? For example, let me just read this one for you guys to look at it. See, note, constraint, including foreign key cascade operators are checked prior to executing either types of trigger. Okay, if it is an instead of trigger, so if you have an instead of trigger, the constraint is checked, right, after the trigger completes. If it's an after of trigger, the constraint is checked prior to the trigger. All right, but here, what happens here is that the instead of trigger is checked after you execute it. So which means that in instead of trigger, instead of when you run it, instead of SQL Server actually executing it, it checks that, right? and fires a different address, a different alert to you and say, okay, this transaction is not accepted. But when you have the after off trigger, what actually happens there is that it really goes through. Sorry, it actually doesn't allow you. I might mix up a couple of things here. Oh, hold on here. Let me bring my mind back together. If it's an instead of trigger, the constraint is checked after the trigger completes. If it's an after trigger, the constraint is checked prior to executing the trigger. Regardless of the trigger event, it causes a constraint violation. For instead of trigger, the entire event is undone or rollback. And in the case of for triggers, these guys are actually confusing me here.
Okay, I sent you.
So
I sent you a link.
The same as the before trigger.
Yeah, on the chat.
Okay, hold on. Let me check that. Let me check the link. Because I'm getting more confused than all of you right now, guys.
I think based off on what I find on research.
Okay, Ddl, go ahead, please. Sorry, I forgot that you had a question.
It's okay. So use before trigger in the case of validation check-in, the same object, insert and update the same object. So basically used to validate, like you mentioned, logins when you want to log in from a different location and your banks, they're not aware that you're not in town. And in order to validate, so this before trigger used to validate your transaction from a different continent or country. And then after is basically used to also track your transaction and make sure that you're the same person that is utilizing the same banking process to avoid impersonation. I mean, I'm using real-time real-time example. But when you using it in a SQL environment, it's more like when you're writing your queries, you're applying your constraint, and then that's when you add these measures just so to prevent data loss or impersonation, stealing people's information.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good. All right. So I think if I go through this article here, you're right. So if I go look at it here, it's going to clarify a couple of things that we have. Well, you see here that I talked about the Dml operation. So triggers, you can put them on different categories, right? You have a DML. That's what most of the time you will come across, which is data manipulation triggers. You also have DDL. So these are not like different types of triggers. These are like subcategory of trigger, which means that inside DDL, you can have instead of DDL trigger, after of DDL trigger. But what this is actually just telling you is what event is happening before the trigger gets fired, right? So for data definition language, what are things that fall under DDL? Who can tell me the difference between a DDL operation and a DML operation?
DDL is the commands that they create, drop.
Okay.
And then while the data manipulation is insert.
Yeah. Is update.
Updates. And yeah.
Okay. So data definition language. Every single time you are defining something, you are defining something that goes as a DDL operation, like create, right? When you're creating something that does not exist, you are creating it, you know. Meanwhile, a DML, that's a data manipulation. You are manipulating data that already exists, right? So you are not changing the structure of it. You are basically manipulating it. So DML operation and DDL operation. There's a lot of differences between a DDL operation and a DML operation. And as an interview question, I'm giving you as a homework, find out the differences between a DDL operation and a DML operation. For a DDL operation, the transaction cannot be rolled back. Meanwhile, for DML operation, you can actually roll back. There's so many other differences between DDL and DML. So when you come to trigger, you find out that for every single one of that action that is taken, you can create a trigger that links to that. And if you create a trigger, that tracks down whenever a database gets created. That is called a DDL trigger. But if
what about TCL?
DDL.
TCL and DCL. Because they all fall under the same.
What's the difference between a TCL and DDL?
DCL. TCL and DCL. In SQL.
The difference between a TCL and DCL.
DCL, correct.
What's DCL?
What are TCL and DCL in the first place? They are full meanings.
What does that stand for,
is
actually?
transaction control language.
DCL stands for transaction control language, and DCL, data control language.
Hold on, let me check.
T or T?
T as in Tom, C as in cat, L as in language.
What's the DML? Okay, all right. All right. You know this? This is what I want you guys to go and read this. Let me send this. This guy is very good. I follow him a lot. SQL Authority. So.
Is he on YouTube?
He has YouTube also. He has YouTube, so you can look at it. So let me send this link. Come on. All right, guys, most of these little kinds of definitions like that, these are things that you really just need to read a little bit, right? You most of the time, you don't really come across this so often, but there's so many little definitions like that in SQL. So I might not know all the answers to all these little definitions, but these are things that you can read up on your own, right? So for example, DCL. DCL is abbreviation for data control language. It's used to create roles, permissions, and reference integrity, as well as it's used to control access to database by securing it, right? So everything that we've done so far under permissions, you can also abbreviate it as DCL operation. Meanwhile, a TCL is abbreviation for transactional control language. It's used to manage different transactions occurring within a database. For example, rollback, commit statement, right? So you can read these DML, DCL, DDL. Most of the time, I come across mostly a DML and DDL operation, all right? But you have this also, so you can read that and add it to your vocabulary. Okay, so now with all these questions, I've lost my thought of mine. Where was I actually?
On triggers.
I was talking about triggers, yes. Okay, I was here, yes, exactly. So I was talking about different types of triggers, right? So on the DDL triggers, so let me just, so we know the DDL and the DML triggers, you know? So on that DML triggers, which also applies to this one. So you have the after triggers. So the after trigger, okay, now I see why we were confused. All right. So the after trigger is actually for the word, the SQL word for it is evoke using the word the for or after clause in the T-SQL clause. When you go into a T-SQL script, for example, like this, you see it there for, after, you see? That's the clause I'm talking about. But it doesn't mean, so this, actually that's the clause that gets evoked. You evoke that to mean exactly the same thing. So that's why I was a little bit confused on this. So, but it actually falls under the word the after trigger. All right, so this type of trigger fires after SQL Server finishes the execution of the action successfully that fires it. For example, if you insert record row on a table, then the trigger related or associated with the insert event on the table will fire only after the row passes all the constraints, like a primary key constraint and some rules. If the record or rows inserted fails, SQL Server will not fire the will not fire the after trigger. Right? So you evoke this when you're creating the after trigger by using the word the for, and you're going to see that here. If I go in here and look at that, you see that, for example, here I can use the word create trigger for insert, which means every single time you do an insert, for insert, right? So in this case here, this is an after trigger. It's evoked by the word for into the statement. So you declare variables. Whenever those variables happen, that's when the trigger gets fired. All right, let's go back to that. So the instead of trigger, right? So the instead of trigger is you call the instead of trigger using the word instead of clause, right? So this type of triggers fires before the SQL Server starts the execution of the action that fires it, right? This is what I was talking about. It's you fire it before SQL Server even fires the event. So this differs from the after trigger, which fires after the action that caused it to fire. So this one fires after the action completes. Meanwhile, this one actually, instead of, is fired before the action, actually. So if you create a two trigger for the same thing, one is after trigger, which is whenever someone tries to insert data into a table, and you reverse the same thing and use it for instead of trigger. If it's an after trigger, when you try to insert, it will eventually insert it and then fires an alert after, which is the same like when you do a transaction on the bank. You get an alert, your transaction has been completed successfully. But if that is an instead of trigger, it rejects the transaction and fires you a different alert. And that's what happens when you go shopping and your transaction is declined, or you're trying to use your card online to buy something and it declines and you get an alert. Those are the two triggers. So these are the two major triggers that DBAs will come across, of course, but there are more other triggers like CLR trigger. Personally, I have never seen this because these are for .NET, C#, Visual Basic, and all those kinds of languages, not SQL Server. Now, logon triggers. This is something that I'm seeing for the first time today, this logon trigger. Let's see what it stands for. Logon trigger as a special type of trigger that fires when logon event. Okay, so this is not really a typical trigger. This is just a trigger that defines a particular event that happens on SQL, which is it's a type of trigger that fires when logon event of SQL Server is raised. This event is raised when a user session is being established with SQL Server that is made after authentication phase finished, but before the user session is actually established. Hence, all messages that we define in the trigger, such as error messages, will be redirected to the SQL Server error log. Okay, you get this error every single time on error log when someone logs on. I really never thought that this was really a trigger, but some people define it as a trigger. Fine, if you want to take it. But in an interview, if you're talking about trigger, after of trigger and instead of trigger are the trigger they're going to talk about. Right? All right, cool. Right, that's it. That's all about triggers. Any question now? Now my mind is now clear now. I can answer your question. I was a little bit mixed up.
I'm going to talk about the after of trigger. I mean, the before, which is the instead. Instead of trigger is based on the security feature of it. It's very important. It's very good because it alerts you, it sends you the alert prior to the fire being done. But the after, it's here. It defines that it's after the event has been executed, and then it also says that if the event failed, it doesn't send you any alert. So it doesn't alert you like someone is trying to, or you know, based on the definition that you put it at, is under security. So I'm trying to look at the variations to that.
Well, the thing is, it doesn't send you any alert because the transaction did not go through, right? Because it didn't go through.
Okay. So based on what I understand regarding what you just said, just in a real-time replica, like day-to-day transaction and activities, especially when we're dealing with a credit card or a regular bank card, it just simply means you go to a bank. Let's just take bank out of the picture. Let's say you're going to shop you went to the store, the regular store, to purchase some grocery, and when you're done and you're using our self-checkout, let's just ignore having somebody checking you out. You're just doing self-checkout and you have a card that you want to use to purchase item.
Yeah.
The security feature of it, you did when the moment you finish ringing all your items that you wanted to check out, and you want to you swipe your card, a trigger has been sent. And then when you put in your PIN number, your card PIN number, let's say you're not using credit card, you're using your debit card, trigger has also been sent to confirm that you're buying. That is more like your ID, like your pass, like what gives you access to confirm the transaction. And once that is being done and you have enough funds in your card, you go through, that is a trigger. That is before trigger. And then after trigger is when you're done with your transaction and you get your receipt. I'm just using this, I'm just making up the instances.
Yeah, I want you guys to avoid that before trigger because it's going to confuse the hell out of all of you.
But the major thing that applies to a real-time experience is the after trigger, which are when you do transaction, you use your card, insert your card and put your password, you make the payment transaction and you get your receipt. Those are the replica of the trigger he's talking about. And the safety features of it is your password that you use to insert in order to do your transaction.
Yes. If you keep the password aside and you look at the only safety feature that you have here is the trigger, then the only one that offers you security is the instead of trigger. Because this one will not offer you any security. If you keep the password aside and you only look at the trigger, that I'm only relying on trigger to protect this database for me, then this one will not offer you any, because of course, if the transaction goes through successfully, it tells you, okay, this person has spent 1 million on your account, and so what? The money is gone. You know?
Okay, the alert you get after you purchase, like you know how you get alert on your cell phone?
Yes.
That a transaction has occurred.
But it's no longer secured. The money is gone.
So when does it apply?
Yeah.
When does it?
This one here will actually stop the transaction from happening.
Yes.
Because it's if the conditions that the trigger was set are met, it will fire that trigger, and instead of you actually getting what we are trying to do, it will fail. It will instead send you another alert. I'm going to show you guys here a real example for you to really see how it works out.
So this kind of example for the instead, it's like when you log into an email from another device, from your phone or from your regular device, and it sends you that alert like, is this you, to confirm whether it's you that you're logging on? If yes, if no, you can actually stop it at that moment from anybody using.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yes.
So you see at that moment, you see how the level of security to control.
Correct.
Doctor.
Yes.
Please, I strongly think that most often it's the combination trigger that is carried out, like both of them are running at the same time.
True.
With the instead of taking care of security and the after of just taking care of confirmation, notification to confirm the transaction.
And in
so
real life,
it's both of them running together.
In real life, that happens. That's really most of them running. That it checks to make sure that you are actually doing the right thing. And when you've done the right thing, it tells you, it sends you an alert that you have successfully carried out this transaction. So those two actually work together, right? So I want you guys just to have it in the back of your mind that this thing really exists, and you can set the very basic ones. But I really, for my entire life as a DBA, I've never written a trigger. But I'm not saying that you guys should not learn what triggers are, but I'm just want to let you know that this is things that exist when it comes to security. And some interviews will really be mean to go into this kind of question, right? So you should know this. It shouldn't happen to you like a surprise.
Okay.
All right. There are certain things in this class that I just teach you for the interview purpose. Some of them I really teach you because I want you to know it, you know? So don't hold me accountable for saying that I didn't learn this because they said it was just for interview. Please, if you can know this, please learn it. You know. Okay, cool.
I have a question. This is not really my question.
Yeah, yes, please, let's minimize the question because I really have a lot to do today. But yeah, last question, please.
Okay, so the main question I have today is in regards to encryption. The reason why I'm so interested in that topic is because most times I use encryption in some documentations, especially when it has to do with people's PII. Yes. I use I use PDF Acrobat. We subscribe to that. To them, we're using them to encrypt some document.
Okay.
When we try to send them out, we put password and then we send the password with the email. Possibly we send the email first and then password. So whoever that wants to access the document will be able to insert the password and then so when it comes to PDF, I know how to insert password and I know how to take it off. Then the database, SQL Server database, this is not the first time you mentioned encryption. I did encryption while I was in school, but it doesn't apply here. So I really want you to touch base on that encryption really, really good so we can have basic knowledge of what encryptions are. Yeah. Just so when we're working in an organization that is really, really mindful of PII, we should be able to apply whatever we've learned so far.
Yes. No, that's a very good question. You might just have to hold on that question for now because encryption itself is a whole topic. We're going to do transparent data encryption, always encrypted, data masking, and all those kinds of things. This is not something to just rush over it, right? We really have the steps on how to set it up, how to restore an encrypted database, and how to encrypt certain rows or entire database. So just hold on that. Once we're done with this project part, that's one of the projects. If you look through the syllabus, you see a transparent data encryption is a real topic on its own, okay? All right? But if you want to know a little bit about that, you can read on transparent data encryption. Those are the type of encryption that we will do eventually when we get to that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So we are going to go ahead right now and set up a trigger. And so practically, let's see the questions coming in left and right. So for those who are just coming in, we are just doing the download. This topic encryption trigger was just to wind some time so we get the downloads done. Let me just cross check again. How many people have it already downloaded?
Yeah, but mine is done.
Mine is still on 96%. Mine is still on 96%. And I wonder why other people's theirs are showing in minutes and mine is showing on percentage.
Now mine was showing percentage.
Maybe
as well.
you should redo it, Blessing. It's been too long.
I'm not downloading nothing. I don't even know what's going on here.
You were late, Ada.
A blessing.
I came in late.
Emma, why are you laughing, Emma?
Doc, you called me.
Yes, can you go ahead and share your screen? I want to get
Emmanuel.
So while we're doing other things, we need to make sure that we're getting it right. Please just go ahead and share your screen.
Okay.
I'll say if anybody can share the link to me.
Okay, so this is my screen, Doc, and this is what is showing 96%.
So go on view downloads. Let's see this. Just click on view downloads where you were.
The link is on the chat.
Hold on, my son just.
The link is on the chat. Did you just join now, Chika?
I couldn't.
Are you referring to me?
Yes, Ada. So you haven't downloaded anything?
Nope, just joining.
Okay, so that's why. All right, click on that link and download that SQL Server I will, once I have half of the class on, I will have to continue because it's a lot of repetition. So we'll have to do this over and over to get everybody up to speed. So don't worry if we start and you are still downloading, that's fine. We will definitely come back to you. Blessing, I was trying to see what's going on. See, stop sharing.
Okay, hold on. Let me share once more. I don't know what my son just pressed now. Okay, let me go ahead and click the evaluation center. Okay, this is where I am.
Can you click on view downloads right in front of you here?
Okay.
So you have 14 seconds remaining.
Almost done.
So you have 4.8 downloaded out of 4.9. So can you?
Okay, so I have 11.4 MB/second.
That's the speed. That's the speed in which is download. That thing is downloading. Can you go ahead and click on clear all? All right. So pause that, click on pause, and let's resume it and let's see. Okay, resuming. All right. So sometimes these things, you see, it's gradually going down at the 8 seconds, 7 seconds.
Yeah, it's going down. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I really don't know why it was stuck. Sometimes, let's see. Now you're done. So click on open folder, yeah. Yeah, that's it on the folder. It's done. I really don't know why it got stuck, but you're good.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, okay. So let's go ahead at least and do a couple. There's not so much you're really going to do on triggers, huh? So the first thing that we're going to look at, I have this example here. Come on. Why is not letting me click anything here? Come on. Guys, I'm stuck now. Jesus. Is it stuck? All right, so I have to close SQL. Need again. What's Microsoft? Server. This one. Why keep fluctuating? There you go. Enters. Why is this thing not ending? And you know what? Let's take a 10 minutes break. Let me get this back on. Please, let's take a 10 minutes break. We'll come back at 10:40, please. Okay, let me get this going.
9:40.
10:40, please.
9:40.
Resume recording. Okay, so we're just going to look at a couple of examples here of what triggers are all about and how we can use it for our day-to-day activities as a DB. If you see that created, you should not really get freaked out what triggers are. All right, so I'm just going to create, so the syntax is very simple, right? It's a create trigger syntax. Then you give it a name to the syntax and you tell SQL Server what you want it to do. Right? And this is where there's a lot of logic that comes in when it comes to triggers here. Okay, but for this one here, we are just going to create a trigger. We can call this trigger here a reminder trigger. And we're creating it on this table, sales customer table, after insert, right? So this is an after of trigger. So when you do an update on this trigger, it just raises this error. When that happens, it raises this message. Okay, so let me send this script to everybody. And there's so many of them online that, like this script, I just didn't write it. I just picked it online, you know, to show you how this works out. You can look at so many other examples online, play with it a little bit, understand how it works out, and try to understand what you're going to do. So if I run this, I'm running it on this database. It works successfully. Where do I actually find that trigger I just created? Let me just wait the table. Table is custom sales.customer. Yeah, triggers, right? So this is where the triggers gets created. So a trigger, just like a computer object, it's a database object, just like store procedure. So for you to see the trigger, a trigger gets created on a particular database on a particular table. So you have to open the database, go to the table where the trigger gets created, expand the table, and you see that here, triggers.
Doctor?
Yes.
Yeah, create trigger reminder on. That says, is it the schema or the database?
This is the schema. It's a database.
Schema. All right, then where you have in bucket, notify customer relationship 16 and 10. You have not changed anything there?
No. I haven't changed anything here. This is just, so what you have here can actually be anything, right? This is just a message that you can put in here, all right? You can put in any message in here for this particular trigger. It's just a raised error message. Whenever someone does an insert, send out this message. And this actually, this 16 and 10 here actually stands to the roll number that you have, but it's just a message that you send out to notify whoever does an insert on this table. All right, so if you expand here, let me delete this one. All right, so we have the trigger here, right? Okay, so now let's try to modify this database, right? So when now we've created this trigger. Now let's go ahead and then update the table, this particular table, sales table, to see how it works out, how the trigger actually works out. Right? Okay, so if I go in here and I say, let me actually first view what the table is all about. I click and I say select top 1000 rows. Okay, so I'm going to do an update on this by changing the store ID number, right? I'm going to change the store ID number here. So if I decide I want to change the store ID number, I can run a script to see how, if the schema actually. So update, right, table. So we're updating the table, the same table. So set update table, update table, update table names, update sales dot customer, right? I can also just say updates customer, that's also fine, we'll also take it. And I set here, set, now which column do I want to do? Set, it just says store ID equal to 10,000. Set store ID equaled equals 10,000. Now you have to use the where clause, otherwise SQL Server just changes everything to 10,000, where customer ID equal to 5, where customer ID equals 5. Semicolon. I don't really need this. Update a customer set store ID. I'll just think correct. Store ID, yeah. Set store ID equal 1000, where customer ID equals 5. Right? I don't know why it's not seeing it.
The 5 will not be inverted comma.
When it's an integer, you really don't need it.
It's integer.
Integer, so you really don't need that. What's wrong here? What's not to update? Let me just run it and see. Invalid object name customer. Am I spelling it wrongly?
Because when I put inverted comma, open and close, it takes out all of those lines, those red lines underlining.
Even for integers, shouldn't. Let me try and see. Shouldn't. Because it's integer, so it shouldn't to me.
All
right, so you see, still.
I put a sales.customer like you put before.
Yeah, but it still the customer.
Yeah.
Well, it shouldn't actually, huh? Because integer shouldn't. But, well. Okay. All right. So now you see what is happening here. You created a trigger and said every single time. Let me remove this actually. Let me just keep this one. This because this makes no sense actually. Now I'm creating trigger. So if I want to change it, I need to do alter trigger. Alter trigger. Will that work? Will the alter statement work on this? Okay, let me just delete the trigger. Wait. Delete. Okay, so now look at this. We are creating a trigger here. Expecting why is this thing? Raise error message. It doesn't show. Okay, hold on. Should not really have to. Should not really bother, right? Sometimes SQL is very funny. It shouldn't really bother to have these numbers in here. You could just give, anyway, we'll see more example. But what is actually happening here is this. In this trigger, what you just want to do is you want a message to be sent out every single time someone tries to update this table. And you could put any message in here. So the moment you try to update, it will send that. So if I pre-create the trigger and I decide to update that table where the trigger is created, if I run that script, what happens is, if I run the script to update it, I get a message here. All right, notify customer relation, right? So this is what a customer sees at the end of the day, but it still tells you here one row affected, right? One row affected. Because, so what happens here is that, now let's go back here and actually look at the table. Let me refresh this. And then go look at the table. And we were doing a schema where the customer ID is equal to 5. So 5. Let's see here. Equal to 5. What did we set in here? Okay. All right. So you actually see here that this is what we just did. The customer ID is equal to 5. We set the store ID to 10 to 1,000. Right. So, and it actually sent out an alert to us. So which type of trigger is this?
After.
Right? This is an after trigger because it's an after trigger for an update. When you actually set this, it's whenever this transaction completes successfully. That's why you see here one row affected. When the transaction completes, it actually sends out an alert to you, and that alert can be anything. You can put anything in here. If I delete this trigger and I put anything in there, anything you define here will be the message that you get. If I can say here, you don't have the done is giving me issues because I put in a comma. You don't. So you cannot put the done like that. You don't have the right to update this table. Now, if I run this, create this trigger, the moment I run this script, right, whatever message you get there sends out. So this is just a very simple example, right? Okay, now let's do more. So another example, I had so many different examples here. Where's the other one? This one.
So what did you say we can find the trigger?
Well, to find a trigger, you need to go to the table where the trigger was created, expand that table, and under triggers, you see the trigger here. This is where it gets created. So when you find yourself in an environment, as a DBA, most of the thing that I do is that when I log into the environment, I check the tables, I check the constraint. What are some of the constraints that you have here previously created? And if a manager walks up to me and say, hey, Akum, can you please try to create a trigger that sends on an alert whenever someone modifies the table? There's thousands of examples online where you can find trigger. I don't expect you to sit down and program this with all the logics and the parameters, the functions, how that is done, because it's not that very easy to do. It's not an easy task to do. So, but I expect that you should be able to pick up one online that works just like that and be able to do it. Now I have another one here. Let's move further. Okay. So this is a much complicated one here. All right, so this one here is a trigger. Okay. So this one, look at it. This is another trigger here. I just picked this one online, and I'm just going to look at it, see if I can understand what the trigger is doing. So I'm creating a trigger. It's called a reminder to, so I can give any name to this. And this trigger also gets created on this same table. And this trigger tracks what? Updates and delete. All right, it's an after trigger takes care of insert, update, and delete. And here, what it's doing is start out by running a store procedure. This is a store procedure, send email. So this store procedure is used to send email. All right, sp_send_dbmail. This is a system store procedure. Now, what we start out by defining a parameter, profile name. We give a name to it. So this is called, let me just call this one, students administrator, class administrator. So DBA administrator. That's the profile name. And the recipient who gets that email sent out to you. I could say, okay, That person is going to be called. So you can define it. I'm just picking this one here. I can modify it to my company email address and kiawi@kiawitech.com. Right? I'm defining just a recipient who gets that and what message to go on the body of the email. Don't forget to print a report of yourself, of the office, and then subject is reminder. So this is what goes into the subject of that email. This is what goes into that email, and this is who received the email. This is the person that received the email, and that's the mail that gets it. Right? This is what gets out. So if I create this trigger, so this trigger is a trigger that's going to fire email, send that email. And this is the person that's going to get it. So if I'm at work and I want to use this in my own environment, I know that whenever someone sends out this, does this, I want this email to be fired to that particular person. If I create that trigger, all right, procedure 2.
It's a comma on line 7. At the end of line 7, there should be a comma. Line 7.
Yeah.
Line 7.
Line 7 is comma missing. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. The trigger gets created. So now let's see what happens now. Let's go back to that same script and say we want to update, do an update on that, on the table. So we update this. We update this, and we set what are some of the columns I will have here again? Customer here, column. We had customer ID, so set customer ID, yeah, customer ID equal to just say 200,000, where where customer ID instead. Let me set this one, where customer ID. This is easy for me. Set store ID. Set store ID is 1 equal to this, where customer ID is equal to what did I have before that? Maybe just 5, for example. Okay, see, now I don't, this is the same script I wrote before. It has errors. Now, without putting the code, there's no errors. Anyway, but let's see. See, the update statement configured with the foreign key. Okay, this is actually not the error message I'm expecting to see. It's a foreign key constraint. There's a foreign key constraint that's giving error message. Okay, on the table, the foreign key is a business entity ID. Wait a minute, update statement. All right, let me first check what is actually on that table. Okay, so I'm going to change, set it 12, and I take this one. So set store ID equal to 12. So let me take 12 here. Update statement is conflicted with the foreign key store ID. All right, so the store ID, there's a foreign key here that's, let me just put something here, lower, 1,000 to 1,000. Okay, now this is the error message we're actually seeing, right? This is no longer the foreign key issued here. But what we are actually seeing here is because the component is still a part of security. Okay, I see why it's not working. All right. For this to actually work, we have to have this parameter set. This is not really a good one. The parameters should already be set up, and it should be able to send out really email to this for this to work. But it did work successfully, but just that the trigger actually doesn't get fired the email that we're expecting to see. All right, let me get a different example. The example could be, let me get a much simpler example, because this one looks so complicated.
Doctor.
Yes, please.
Please, I noticed that under programmability, we have something they call database triggers. I don't know if it's the same thing or something totally different.
Or programmability.
Yeah, database trigger. If I right click and try to create a new one,
so it
gives me a script. Nice.
Yes, you can actually create. Look, it just gives you it doesn't give you a script. It gives you the syntax to create a trigger.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
It gives you the syntax to create a trigger. This one here at this level gets created not at the database level, but at the server level.
Okay.
And this is for all the data. If you want to create a trigger that affects all the databases, you create it here on database trigger. But if the trigger is really just for that particular database, you create it under that database. All right. Okay. So I wanted to get one that I used last time for this trigger. Let me get this one here. Triggers. Okay. So this trigger here is, I just call it, I check modify date on this particular database for insert. And now this is a little bit of complexity that comes in here on this whole thing. Now we define a parameter, right? Last time I told you about defining parameters. Whenever you define a parameter, the @ sign, you have to give the data type. You define another parameter, you give a data type, and then you select this equal to this date, that equal to this date, and you are now doing the function that we did last time, checking the differences. Now, if date different in terms of date, if this date that you set here, if it is greater than the date of today, which means equal to 0, when that happens, you do an update and set the date equal to the date of today. That's a complicated one, but this is what this trigger is just telling you. I am creating a trigger that if somebody comes into this table, most of the triggers that you find online, they always explain what the trigger is used for. Now, what happens here, if someone comes to this table called department table and try to modify, let's say you try to modify something on that table and you're trying to change the date, which is the modified date column. You're trying to change it and put a different date. SQL Server will force you to put the date of today. That's what this one is saying here. If the date difference, right? Silver, last time you said you used your calculator. In this case, you're not going to use your calculator here because you need to check something here. This one is just simply telling you the difference between the date of today and the date that you are putting on the modified column. If it is greater than 0, right, SQL Server is going to force you to do an update on that table and put the date of today, get date. Now, let me run this and let me send you guys this script also. I know this sounds like jargon to a lot of ears here, but you still need to hear this, you know. All right, now look at this. We've created this trigger here on this database, right? Okay, so now to see that, you need to expand the table, which is the department table. Where is it? Human Resources Department. Human Resources Department. Expand and expand. This is a trigger here. So now let's go in on that particular table and try to add a role and change the column. So let me say edit. So this is the modified date column that is we're tracking, but this modified date column, right? So I come here and I write this one here. The name is executive. I can call it finance department. I call it bookkeeping. Let me just call it bookkeeping. Bookkeeping. And this bookkeeping is for group name BK. So now I'm just going to try to, I'm modifying this and I'm trying to hide the date. So I want to backdate this. let's say I'm just backdating this to 2001. This was on January 30th. No, January 30th. And just copy this one and put here. Can I copy? Yeah, let me just, okay. All right, so if I close this, for example, and then I run this again one more time. Check what happens here. The date that I put here was 2001, January 1st, 30th, 2001. But look at what SQL Server does. It actually allows me to do it, right? But it forces you to insert something here. So what type of trigger is this?
After.
It's not an after all, because this is not what you actually inserted. This is an instead of. Because the date is the date of today, the 30th, March 30th. Why? Because I did here and I said, okay, if you try to change the date, please do an update and force the date of today into that column. It picks up the date of today. All right, I'm going to stop here, but honestly, the topic trigger, you need to just go online, check. There are so many different types of triggers so that you can play with it. Look, all this is Microsoft page. You can try to play with it, so many triggers, see how it works out. The only thing that I wanted to show you here is the kind of triggers that also exist, how you can create very basic triggers to do an insert into a table. And at the same time, if you need to delete a trigger, you just right click and say delete. And you click OK. If you want to modify a trigger, right click, go to modify. And when you click modify, the script will come out. And then you just modify whatever you want to modify and save the trigger. So that's how triggers are used for. All right, I'm going to stop here because this is really not what I plan to teach today. So I'm sure by now, all the downloads will be done.
Quick question, Doctor. I missed the part where Akom said was.
Record this. So the first step that we're about to do in virtualization is we need to enable hypervisor on the computer, because not all the computers, once you upgrade, you need to enable hypervisor. And to enable that, you have to go down on the search menu and type turn feature on and off. Just type the word turn. It will pop up when you start. Yeah, that's it. Turn Windows feature on off. Click OK. All right. What did you do?
Where did it go?
Do it again. You click. You were too fast. Turn window feature on off. Turn.
Sorry, please. Is this installation meant for the people that have Windows Pro?
You said click OK.
Windows Pro, yes. If you have Windows Pro, you need to do what I'm doing right now. Eddie is the only one that did not have.
I don't have it.
Didn't you just say that silver verified and you said you have it? Who said that? Were you the one?
I don't have it now. You said I do not have it. It's only
no, the person who had it is Anis.
Oh, it's Anis. All right, I'll come back to you later, Mommy. Okay.
Okay.
You need to upgrade. That's if you don't have it, you need to upgrade. What we're trying to do with Eddie, that's what you need to upgrade.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So are we all here?
Yes.
Yes, Doc.
No. How did you get here? Sorry. I stepped out.
Go to your search menu and type turn window on off. Just type the word turn, it will pop up. You see Hyper-V option there?
Yeah.
Yes, Doc.
Expand that plus sign.
Is it turn Windows features on and off?
Yes. You should find yourself here.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, I'm where you are now.
Lo and behold, there comes the biggest problem. All right.
You need to buy.
Expand all that where you have Hyper-V. Expand everything in there under Hyper-V. Expand.
You have Hyper-V management tools on Hyper-V platform.
Yeah, expand all that. Expand all that. Everything Hyper-V. Expand it. The one below also. No. It expands Hyper-V platform also.
What is a Hyper-V platform?
Your mouse is just on top of it. Expand that.
Oh, this one?
No.
This one, right?
Okay. So you can see Hyper-V, Hypervisor for you is grayed out. That's a very difficult thing to do. We'll have to enable it from the BIOS. Okay. Some people will not have this, some will have it. Okay. Who has it grayed out?
Who has it not?
Hyper-V,
Grayed, right? I have it.
Grayed out?
Yes.
Okay, 2 people. Anyone else? Okay, Margaret, you're not able to continue. All this has to. I'll need to enable it from the BIOS. You're going to stop sharing. Let me get Margaret to share her screen. We'll have to enable it from the BIOS. What model of computer? What is your model? A computer model?
HP.
What about Emmanuel?
It's HP.
Okay, it's easy to do that HP, right? This is how it's supposed to look like, right? All you need to do is make sure that everything Hyper-V is checked. Check all those boxes. Check all those boxes. All right, that's it. Click OK. You are enabling the hypervisor. It will enable you to now be able to start creating virtual machine. It will allow, after this, you will need to restart your computer. Is there anyone apart from these 2 people that had that issue where the Hyper-V platform was grayed out?
Oh, sorry, mine wasn't grayed out here.
I thought you said yours was grayed out.
No.
Okay, so Margaret is the only one. Margaret,
mine too, please.
Okay.
Some people don't even know what you're talking about.
I have restart your computer now. Should I restart?
Yes, it will ask you to start your computer. Please restart it.
Okay.
So, all right. So I'm going to call you on WhatsApp on video because I have to get into your computer. You have to switch off your computer and we'll enable it from the BIOS. All right, virtualization has to be enabled from the computer BIOS. So
if yours is grayed out, speak right now.
BIOS, B-I-O-S, BIOS.
Please, Doc, can you say it loudly so that maybe we can follow the steps? Because I have the same issue with that.
He said later.
Do you also have an HP?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good. HP all have the same method to do it. So what we're going to do, Margaret, I'm going to call you on WhatsApp video.
Right now?
Yes, I'm going to call you on WhatsApp video. And you're going to point towards your laptop so I can see what you're doing.
All right.
So what you need to do is, let me stop recording because this is not really part of the class.